Sign up with the discount coupon below for the next Mises Institute conference in Tampa, Florida. And thank you to everyone who participated in our first ever contest to predict Bitcoin versus gold in 2025. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Minor Issues Podcast. I'm Mark Thornton at the Mises Institute. Americans are far more satisfied with the way things are going in their own life than with the U.S. in general. Economists' forte is prices and the price system, not opinion polls and surveys. Nevertheless, we are curious to take the pulse of society. In this case, what do people's subjective perceptions reveal about the world around them? In particular, the Minor Issues Podcast and other Mises Institute podcasts have extensively discussed how various government policies have been impacting people, mostly in America, both positive and negative. In contrast, most other voices have declared a different set of conclusions. President Biden, the mainstream media, Paul Krugman, etc. Followers of the left-wing tribe seem particularly perplexed about the outcome of the election relative to what they know about the world. People have expressed to me their confusion, frustration, and even astonishment, the temperament of the American electorate and voting patterns in the last election. From the brain trust on the TV show The View to Paul Krugman's writings in the New York Times, people seem to think the opinion polls are newly rigged by political partisanship. After all, according to this view, opinion polls in the latest voting results are at odds with the facts as they are presented in the mainstream media, government statistical offices, and even the stock market. Let's take a look at the latest polling results on the reported satisfaction Americans see and how they actually line up. By the way, the polling results line up very well with the Minor Issues podcast perspective. In terms of Americans who were very satisfied, since the Gallup poll began in January of 2001, the highest reported level, 65%, was in January 2020, near the end of the first Trump administration, but prior to COVID and the government onslaught of policies that ensued. At this point in time, food and fuel prices were low, as was unemployment. Stocks were high, and the world was basically peaceful. The neocons and technocrats, along with the power elites and the mainstream media, were enraged at those conditions, and they had engaged or began to engage in a misinformation and legal campaigns against Trump. At the same time, that record high satisfaction of 65% was being reached, Austrian economists, including myself, were declaring that the bubble-like conditions by the Fed would soon end an economic crisis. We can support that contention between very high satisfaction readings and bubble-like conditions in the stock market by looking at the second highest reading of 59%, which occurred at the zenith of the housing bubble back in 2007. Very satisfied polling results then fell to a survey low of 46% in 2011 during the Fed's great financial crisis. Today, in January 2025, very satisfied has fallen to an all-time low of 44% over the course of COVID, the mandates, the shutdowns, the Fed's inflation, and continued massive deficit spending. Again, some people are puzzled that all the free money, mandated time off, subsidies, bailouts, etc., has made people less satisfied. This puzzlement is probably due to mainstream media misinformation campaigns and or because they do not understand human nature. Personal satisfaction has a great deal to do with economic confidence and personal enrichment, not government subsidies. The group that has remained the most satisfied would be characterized as older women, well-to-do Democrats. It might be interesting to take this demographic and compare the audiences of Joe Rogan and the TV show The View. While very satisfied has fallen from 2020 to 2025 for almost every demographic marker, Republican has fallen the most. Under that tag, the younger, male, low and middle income groups, regular churchgoers, and those not college educated have fallen the most, which is what we've been basically saying at the Minor Issues podcast and other Institute podcasts have been emphasizing, particularly Rothbard Radio. Government policies and debt, and especially the Fed's inflation, is hurting young, middle-income, working-class families and benefiting the wealthy elites. Just look at young families trying to buy a home versus retirees who've already paid off their home or enjoying a low interest rate mortgage and very high prices for their real estate. The government has made family formation and home ownership prohibitively expensive. But those higher stock prices, higher interest rates, and lucrative government subsidies and contracts are filling the pockets of upper, middle, and upper income classes. In contrast to satisfaction with their personal lives, satisfaction with the U.S. government is only 20% versus 77% who are satisfied with conditions in the U.S. In recent years, peak satisfaction was 2020 before COVID, and peak dissatisfaction was the COVID year, with only marginal improvements since the lockdowns have been eliminated. If you are in the extreme minority in being personally satisfied and satisfied with the U.S., and you are puzzled by your minority status, you will find some resolution in the outside nefarious impacts that the Federal Reserve secretly plays in our lives, the negative effects of COVID policy on some people's psyches, the hidden economic losses, or runaway government spending and deficits and how they harm the future, and especially the government's brazen and largely unchecked assaults on personal liberties and constitutional rights.